my first year teaching in the dual immersion program. I really enjoyed it. I team teach with Alicia Hollis, and we've got a beautiful PowerPoint. I'll try to get started for you.
And so I'm Alicia Hollis, and I teach the Spanish half of the 5th grade dual immersion at Woodside. We're going to be talking about what your child's day would look like in the dual immersion program. And basically, the program is designed so that for every 2 classes of students, so every 2 groups of 20-ish kids, there are going to be 2 teachers, one who teaches English and one who teaches Spanish. And because Hemingway is adding an additional class, the model will be the same now both in the North and in the South Valley, whereas before it had been slightly different. The kids are going to receive instruction in all academic areas in both languages. So that we do some rotating of what we're kind of focusing on and what we're putting emphasis on, but instruction will be done in both languages in really all content areas. It should be an equal amount of instruction, but seeing as we live in a world where in the cafeteria and on the playground and in the grocery store you'll be hearing more English, it's the same in the school, which means that specialist classes are taught in English. When the kids are in the hallway, it's a mix. It's very bilingual in nature, which is great. One important thing to realize is that students don't repeat concepts. So what that means is if we start to teach a unit about, let's see, if I'm starting a chemistry unit, for example, I might start it in Spanish, but then the next chapter my partner might be teaching. She's not going to reteach what I've already taught in Spanish, again in English. She'll continue with where I left off. So we're going to have a lot of vocabulary going on, which is one of the big things, especially once you get to some of the upper grades, is we do have to cover some vocabulary more than once for the sake of movement, but they're not going to be learning the big concepts over again. So, which I know it can be a concern because there's a lot of material to cover, and how do you do it in both languages? Well, we just keep moving.
So throughout the Valley right now, there are different models for how the teachers alternate between English and Spanish. Some schools do 1 day in English, 1 day in Spanish, and back and forth. Some schools choose to do half a week of Spanish and the second half in English. Some groups do 1 week in English, 1 week in Spanish. And our 4th grade here does 2 weeks on Spanish and 2 weeks on English. The 5th grade here, we choose to switch our classes every day so that we spend half the day in English and half the day in Spanish.
The important thing, though, is that whatever model is chosen, the teachers stick with through the entire year. So even though it sounded confusing by us going through each of those individual ones, your child is not going to see that all through the course of the year. If the group does 2 weeks on in Spanish, 2 weeks in English, that's how it stays consistent through the entire year. This is our 5th grade model, and it's actually in some ways the most complicated, but it's because the kids can handle it. And that's one of the main ways that teachers decide on how to organize their days and their instruction, is based on the level of the children. So at 5th grade, we do switch midday. So what that means here is the yellow group continues. So if they start in the Spanish classroom, the day will look very similar as it would to any other classroom. So if it starts in Spanish, they'll have their morning literacy, and then they'll have their regular specials like all the other 5th grades, recess with all the other 5th grades. Then math, the reason that's in line is because at 5th grade level, we actually do leveled math groupings, which means that at 5th grade, 1 hour of our math instruction is in all English in order to include the English-only classroom in our building. It is also possible to do math grouping within the 2 classes, or just to teach within your own classroom. And there are lots of different we all do it a little bit differently based on the needs of our students at that particular age. So then at 11:45 is when the kids go to lunch. And after lunch, the kids come into whatever classroom we start with in the morning. They grab their backpacks and their binders, and they head to the next classroom. So I'll reteach what I taught in the morning again in the afternoon, but the kids will have a pathway from Spanish to English or from English to Spanish. One other thing about that is the way that we've organized it at 5th grade level is we kind of alternate what weeks we're going to really emphasize what kinds of content. So since we have a lot of curriculum to get through at all grade levels, for example, if I'm in a social studies week, I'm going to be doing literacy in the morning, but I'm going to be doing it through our social studies content. So for example, right now is Revolutionary War. I'm teaching literacy, I'm teaching all of the different comprehension skills, I'm teaching cause and effect, all of those different things, but using social studies. At the same time, that week, Heather would be using the Mifflin series or novel studies, or things that are really literacy, literature-based. So that's how we kind of balance out so that our kids aren't going to have 2 spelling lists in 1 week, for example. Now, the next 2 are the models that show if your child is in Spanish or English for an entire day, an example of what their day might look like. At 5th grade, it is definitely the most complicated because they start in the morning in Spanish and then into English or vice versa.
So a typical Spanish day, students arrive at 7:45, report to the Spanish classroom. They begin the day with grammar study in Spanish. They study the Spanish alphabet. They do oral language warm-up. They begin the literacy rotation, reading, writing, written responses, comprehension skills in Spanish. Then they go to their specials, which would be either art or music or PE or technology or computers. Every day that class is taught in English only. Then they'll go to recess and have snack time, come back and do math, perhaps a geometry lesson on perimeter. Then they'd have their science investigations of the solar system. They go to lunch, they'd be read to aloud, and then they'd come back and do some writing. This is just an example. They'd be learning how to write 5-sentence descriptive paragraphs. They do a daily wrap-up, and then they'd go home. That would be a typical day in Spanish.
And I just wanted, the reason that I put it in the different examples is to demonstrate that their day looks like a normal class day in any classroom, but everything's taught in Spanish. So, if we're working on geometry, we're still doing geometry, we're still doing perimeter, normal curricular elements, it's just that it's in Spanish. It could be. Yeah, we would do metric as well.
An English typical day, perhaps they arrive at 7:45, report to the English classroom, begin their day with grammar study in English, the English alphabet, oral language warm-up. Again, they do their literacy centers with reading, written responses, comprehension skills, and they do opposite art or music or PE or tech or computers. And they have recess and snack, come back and math, perhaps study multiplication. They do some extended math problem-solving strategies. At lunch, come back and be read to aloud in English. They do social studies, perhaps they're studying Idaho history and the pioneers, doing a cooperative learning timeline. They have a daily wrap-up, and they go home. Starting in 1st grade for those kind of grades.